This happened to me on a rainy night last October, driving down Route 66 in the middle of nowhere. It's a night I can't shake, no matter how hard I try. I'd been driving for hours, the rain coming down like crazy, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I was on my way to Albuquerque from Oklahoma City, planning to crash at a cheap motel off I-40 before finishing the drive the next day. The constant pounding of the rain on my windshield was almost hypnotic, and I was just starting to feel the weight of exhaustion setting in when I saw him. He was standing on the shoulder, drenched to the bone, thumb out, and a desperate look on his face. Now, I'm not usually one to pick up hitchhikers. You hear too many horror stories. But something about this guy made me pull over. Maybe it was the rain, or maybe it was just the thought of leaving someone out there in the middle of nowhere. Whatever it was, I slowed to a stop and rolled down the passenger side window. "Need a ride?" I called out. The guy's face lit up and he jogged over, water streaming off his jacket. "Man, you don't know how much I appreciate this," he said, his voice shaky from the cold. "I've been out here for hours." I unlocked the door and he climbed in, bringing a blast of cold, wet air with him. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and a scruffy beard. His clothes were soaked, and he shivered as he buckled his seatbelt. "Thanks, man," he said again, rubbing his hands together. "Name's Jake." "Dave," I replied, pulling back out onto the road. "Where are you headed?" "Anywhere but here," Jake said with a nervous laugh. "Just need to get away." I glanced over at him, eyebrows raised. "Get away from what?" Jake hesitated, staring out the window at the rain. "It's a long story," he said finally, "but let's just say I'm in a bit of trouble." I didn't press him for details. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that everyone's got their own problems, and sometimes it's best not to dig too deep. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers and the drumming of the rain. After a few miles, Jake started to relax a bit. He asked where I was headed, and we made small talk about the weather, the state of the roads, and how much we both hated driving in the rain. But every now and then I'd catch him glancing nervously over his shoulder, like he was expecting someone to be following us. "Everything okay?" I finally asked, unable to ignore the tension any longer. Jake jumped, then forced a laugh. Yeah, it's fine. Just, paranoid, I guess." "Paranoid about what?" I pressed, starting to feel a little uneasy myself. Jake ran a hand through his wet hair, sighing. "All right, look, I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm running from someone dangerous." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my mind racing. "What kind of dangerous?" "The kind that doesn't stop until they find you," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The kind that'll do whatever it takes to get what they want." At this point, I was starting to feel like I was in a sketchy situation. I'd seen enough movies to know where this was going, and it wasn't anywhere good. But we were in the middle of nowhere, and kicking him out in the rain didn't seem like an option. "Who is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who are you running from?" Jake hesitated again, then looked me straight in the eye. "A guy named Carter. Let's say he's just not someone you want to mess with. I got mixed up in some bad stuff and now he's after me." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. This was bad. Really bad. "What kind of stuff?" Jake shook his head. "It's better if you don't know. Trust me." We drove in silence for a while. The tension in the car was crazy. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every muscle in my body tensed. This guy had brought a whole heap of trouble into my car, and now I was stuck in the middle of it. As we drove, Jake's paranoia seemed to grow. He kept glancing out the back window, his leg bouncing nervously. He'd jump at every passing car and would constantly look around nervously. Honestly, he was starting to freak me out, like a lot. "Hey man, you need to calm down," I said finally, trying to keep my own fear in check. "We're gonna get through this, alright? Just tell me what I can do to help." Jake looked at me, his eyes wide and desperate. "Just keep driving. Don't stop for anything. We need to get as far away as possible." I nodded, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I could feel the fear radiating off him, and it was starting to seep into me. Every mile felt like a lifetime, the rain pounding down relentlessly. We passed through small towns, their lights barely visible through the downpour. Gas stations and restaurants flickered by, but I felt too scared to stop. Jake was a bundle of nerves, and I wasn't about to take any chances. After about an hour, we finally hit a stretch of highway with no other cars in sight. The road was dark and empty, the only light coming from my headlights cutting through the rain. Jake seemed to relax a bit, sinking back into his seat with a sigh. "Thanks, man," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "You don't know what this means to me." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. This was way beyond anything I'd ever dealt with, and I was starting to feel in over my head. And then, out of nowhere, a car appeared behind us, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Jake tensed up immediately, his eyes wide with fear. "Oh man, that's him," he whispered, his voice trembling. "That's Carter." My heart jumped, and I pressed down on the gas, the engine roaring up as we sped up. The car behind us matched our speed, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror. "What do we do?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Just keep driving," Jake said, his voice shaking. "Don't let him catch us." I nodded and kept going. The rain was coming down harder now, making it almost impossible to see. I could barely make out the lines on the road. The car behind us kept gaining, its headlights blinding. I could feel the fear rising in me, every instinct screaming at me to get away, but there was nowhere to go, no way to escape. And then, without warning, the car switched to the lane next to me, accelerated hard and passed me. The car then merged back into my lane after passing us. We both sat there just watching the taillights pulling away from us, realizing that wasn't Carter. It wasn't the guy that Jake was so paranoid about. It was just another car traveling on the highway like us, but I guess we were just going too slow for them. Jake laughed nervously and looked over at me. "Well, I guess that wasn't Carter." I could feel my heart pumping from the adrenaline rush. I was so freaked out at this whole situation. At this point, I just couldn't be in the car with this guy anymore. There was an exit coming up with a gas station, and it was my opportunity to drop him off somewhere safe. "I need to get gas at this next exit, and I think it's best if I drop you off there." "Sure, man, I understand. I just appreciate you picking me up out of that rain," Jake said with gratitude and understanding. My heart was still pounding as we took the exit. I pulled into the gas station and up to the gas pump. We both got out and Jake looked over at me. "Thanks, man. I really do appreciate it. I didn't mean to get you caught up in my business. You really saved me out there, though." I nodded and just said, "No problem, and good luck." After getting gas, I got back onto the road as fast as possible. I could see Jake standing in front of the gas station mart in my rearview mirror as I drove away, the rain pounding down on the roof of the car. I could feel the cold air seeping in, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving me drained and exhausted. I never saw him again. I don't know what happened to him, if he ever managed to escape that guy, but that night haunts me, a dark shadow in my memory. Every time I drive down that highway, I can feel the fear creeping back in. It's a night I can't shake, no matter how hard I try. Driving alone on the interstate can be a boring experience, but for me, a simple drive turned into a nightmarish experience I'll never forget. It was a warm summer evening in July, and I was driving back to Chicago from a weekend visit to my parents' house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I had just passed through the small town of Sterling, Illinois, when it happened. The front passenger tire blew out with a loud bang, and my car swerved dangerously before I managed to pull over to the side of the road. My heart was pounding in my chest as I came to a stop on a desolate stretch of highway. I got out of the car to assess the damage. The tire was completely shredded, and there was no way I could drive any further without replacing it. I rummaged through the trunk for the spare tire and jack, but I quickly realized that the spare tire was also flat. I just couldn't believe my bad luck. I grabbed my phone from the front of the car and called for roadside assistance. After a brief conversation with the operator, I was told that a tow truck would be dispatched to my location, but it would take at least an hour for it to arrive. I sighed and leaned against the car, watching the sky darken as the sun dipped below the horizon. The highway was eerily quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. As time went on, I became increasingly uneasy. There was something unsettling about being stranded in the middle of nowhere with no one around to help. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through social media on my phone, but the dwindling battery reminded me that I needed to conserve power in case of an emergency. It was then that I saw headlights approaching from the distance. A beat-up old pickup truck slowed down as it neared my car and pulled over to the side of the road. The driver, a man in his late 40s, got out and walked toward me with a friendly smile. "Looks like you could use some help," he said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. I hesitated for a moment before responding, "Yeah, I had a blowout and my spare is flat too. I'm waiting for roadside assistance, but they said it would take about an hour." The man nodded sympathetically. "That's a tough break. I can take a look at it if you want. I've got some tools in the back of my truck." I glanced at his truck, noticing the array of tools and equipment in the bed. It seemed like he knew what he was doing, and I was desperate for help. I decided to trust him, at least for the moment. The man introduced himself as Daniel and got to work examining the damaged tire. He confirmed that the spare was flat and suggested that he could give me a ride to the nearest gas station to get it fixed. "It's about 10 miles up the road," he said. "Shouldn't take long." I was reluctant to leave my car, but Daniel assured me that it would be safe. He seemed genuine, and I didn't want to wait in the dark any longer than necessary. I grabbed my phone, locked the car, and got into the passenger seat of his truck. As we drove, Daniel made small talk, talking about my trip and sharing stories about his life. He seemed like an ordinary guy, and I started to relax a little. However, my sense of nervousness returned when I noticed that we were heading away from the main highway. "Isn't the gas station in the other direction?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a closer one this way," he replied. "Trust me, I know these roads." I didn't have much choice but to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The further we drove, the more remote the area became. The trees were getting thicker and the darkness seemed to close in around us. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel finally pulled into a small, dimly lit gas station. Relief washed over me as I got out of the truck and stretched my legs. Daniel handed me the flat spare tire and pointed me toward the entrance. "I'll wait here," he said. "Go on and get it fixed. I'll stay with the truck." I thanked him and hurried inside. The gas station attendant, a grizzly old man with a cigarette hanging from his lips, barely glanced at me as I explained my situation. He took the tire and disappeared into the back, leaving me alone in the dimly lit store. As I waited, I couldn't help but glance back outside at Daniel's truck. The longer I stood there, the more anxious I became. Something about Daniel's behavior was nagging at me. but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. When the attendant finally returned with the repaired tire, I thanked him and paid for the service. As I walked back to the truck, I noticed something that made me stop in my tracks. The bed of Daniel's truck, which had seemed cluttered with tools, also contained several lengths of rope and a large roll of duct tape. A chill ran down my body as I realized the implications. I tried to stay calm as I approached the truck, but my mind was racing with thoughts of how to get out of this situation. I needed to find a way to get back to my car without arousing Daniel's suspicion. Daniel greeted me with a smile as I handed him the repaired tire. "All set?" he asked. "Yeah, thanks for your help," I replied, forcing a smile. "I think I'll just wait for the tow truck to come. I called them and told them to meet me at this location. They should be here soon." Daniel's expression changed, and for a moment I saw something dark and sinister in his eyes. "Nonsense," he said. "I'll take you back to your car. It's no trouble at all." I felt a surge of panic, but tried to keep my voice steady. "Really, it's fine. I appreciate your help, but I can manage from here." Daniel's grip tightened on the tire, and his friendly facade slipped away entirely. "Get in the truck," he said, his voice cold and commanding. My heart was pounding as I weighed my options. I could try to run, but I doubted I could outrun him. I needed to outsmart him. "Okay," I said, trying to sound calm. "Let me just grab something from the store real quick. I'll be right back." Daniel narrowed his eyes but nodded. "Make it quick." I turned and walked back into the gas station, my mind racing. I needed to find a way to alert someone, anyone, to my situation. As I entered the store, I saw the attendant watching me with a curious expression. "Can I use your phone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mine's dead and I need to make a quick call." The attendant shrugged and handed me an old battered phone. I dialed 911, my hands shaking as I explained my situation in a hushed voice. The operator assured me that help was on the way and advised me to stay inside the store until they arrived. I hung up the phone and turned to the attendant, who was still watching me with a curious expression. "I think I'm in trouble," I said quietly. "Can you keep an eye on that guy outside? He's acting really weird." The attendant's expression hardened and he nodded. "Stay here," he said. "I'll take care of it." I watched as the attendant walked outside and confronted Daniel. There was a tense exchange of words, but I couldn't hear what was being said. Moments later, Daniel got back into his truck and sped off into the night. Relief washed over me as I realized that I was safe, at least for the moment. The police arrived shortly after, and I gave them a detailed account of what had happened. They assured me that they would investigate and escorted me back to my car with my newly repaired tire. As I drove the rest of the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling of that fear I felt. I kept replaying the events of the night in my mind, wondering what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts. The experience left me shaken, but it also taught me a valuable lesson about trusting my instincts and being cautious when accepting help from strangers. It was supposed to be just another late-night drive. I had been visiting my friend Kaylee, who lived in a small town called Milton, just a couple of hours outside of Boston. The night had been fun, full of laughter and catching up, but as midnight approached, I decided it was time to head back home. I wasn't too worried about the drive. I'd made the trip several times before, but that night, something felt different. The air had a crisp chill to it, typical for early autumn in New England. As I drove through the quiet streets of Milton, the leaves on the trees were just starting to turn shades of orange and red. It was the kind of night that made you appreciate the beauty of the season, but also reminded you of the coming cold. I was cruising along the I-495, the radio turned down low, my mind lost in thoughts about work and life. The night was pitch black, with only the occasional car passing by. Everything was fine until I noticed a sign for an exit I didn't recognize. It read Cobbler's Creek, exit 62A. Curious and feeling a bit adventurous, I decided to take it. I figured it might be a shortcut or at least an interesting detour. As soon as I took the exit, the road became narrower and the surroundings darker. Trees lined either side, their branches forming a canopy that almost blocked out the moonlight. The dense foliage seemed to close in on me, creating an almost tunnel-like effect. The further I drove, the more isolated I felt. The road, initially paved, soon turned to gravel, and the crunching sound under my tires added to the eerie atmosphere. I drove on, expecting to find another sign or a turnoff that would lead me back to the main road, but there was nothing. Just endless trees and the faint glow of my headlights slicing through the darkness. The unease that had been a quiet whisper in the back of my mind began to grow louder. The road seemed to stretch on forever with no end in sight. My GPS had lost signal and my phone was down to its last few percent of battery. The uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger. Just as I was considering turning around, I saw it. A car, broken down on the side of the road. It was an old beat-up sedan, its hood propped open as if someone had been working on it. I slowed down, my headlights illuminating the empty vehicle. There was no one around, no lights from a nearby house, no sign of anyone walking, just the car, sitting there in the dark, abandoned. I rolled down my window and called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" Silence. I glanced at my phone, still no signal. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe they had gone to get help, or maybe they were hiding, waiting for someone like me to stop. The whole situation just felt creepy, and I decided it was best to keep moving. I rolled up the window and pressed the gas, my car inching forward. That's when I saw it in my rearview mirror. The lights of the broken down car flickered on. I froze for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. The car's engine roared to life, and it pulled onto the road, slowly following me. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe they had fixed their car and were also trying to find their way back. But as I picked up speed, so did they. Every turn I made, they followed. The road twisted and turned through the dense forest, and every time I thought I'd lost them, their headlights appeared again in the distance. The sense of fear grew with every passing minute. I needed to get back to the main road, to civilization. I was looking around and searching for any sign that might lead me out of this nightmare. Finally, I saw a dimly lit gas station up ahead. It was old and run down, but it was something. I pulled in pretty fast, my tires sliding on the gravel as I came to a stop. The car behind me slowed down but didn't stop. Instead, it drove past the gas station and continued down the road, disappearing into the night. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The gas station was eerily quiet. The only light came from the flickering light above the entrance. I got out of my car, my hands shaking, and walked inside. The bell above the door jingled, but no one was behind the counter. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No response. I walked to the back of the store, searching for any sign of life. Suddenly, I heard the crunch of gravel outside. I peered through a dusty window and saw the car. It had turned around now and was parked outside of the gas station, its headlights off, but I could see the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. Panic set in. I needed to get out of there. I rushed back to my car, fumbling with my keys. As I started the engine, the other car's headlights turned on again, blinding me. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires spinning in the gravel, and then sped out of the gas station and back onto the road. I drove on for what felt like an eternity without stopping, my eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. The car was gone, but the fear lingered. Eventually, I saw familiar signs for the I-495 and made my way back to the main highway. The tension in my body slowly eased as the lights of Boston came into view. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun was beginning to rise. I sat in my car for a moment, trying to process what had happened. It felt like a bad dream, but the fear was real. I never did find out who was in that car or what they wanted. All I know is that I'll never take an unknown exit late at night again.